Prologue. Jonathan stared at the ring sitting in the palm of his hand and leaned back in his chair, bringing it to the brink of tipping over, then letting himself balance precariously at that angle. From that position, he could see that the sky was beginning to darken already. There wouldn't be much time left now. They'd have to begin the hunt soon. Not that he was particularly nervous about the danger of it. They'd been using the same fighting tactics for years now. No, it was just the thought of retirement that scared him. He'd been going on hunts since he was 18. He'd created some of the world's most powerful artifacts, and he'd helped to bring down the most powerful demon in modern history. How was he supposed to stay at home all day? But he and Iris had agreed. They had a chance to raise their daughter together, and it wasn't worth giving up just because they would get a bit restless. Iris didn't look nearly as bothered by the idea, though. She was busy chatting up a storm with Evelyn about something or other. They had the worst type of target, too, a dredge. If it was exceedingly weak or exceedingly strong, there might be something to talk about. But dredges were a completely random phenomenon. They could be insanely strong, insanely weak, and they always seemed to have some strange, random effect. There was no good way to prepare for one, unless you already had information on them, and the field agents who saw this one died, so there was nothing. Why couldn't it have at least been something interesting for their last assignment, like a Wendigo or a vampire? Are you even listening, Jonathan? Evelyn? Well, there was no way he could ignore her for very long. Jonathan let himself tip back forward, so that his chair was sitting even on the ground and he could look Evelyn in the eyes. No. It was a little rude to answer that way, but it was the honest truth. Trying to hide something like that from Evelyn was about as counterproductive as it could get. Besides, she couldn't really blame him for being exhausted. They'd been running themselves ragged the past few months, completing as many missions as possible just to raise retirement money. Evelyn looked into his eyes for a moment, before sighing and turning to Iris. Why don't you say it again? John, I don't think it's safe for you to carry that many rings with you. The agency has already deemed them to be too powerful. What if some mages take it into their own hands? John waved away the thought. Of course he couldn't keep them. They were only his life's work, proof of their adventures together. How could they not be sad about this? But such was the life of a mage. You spend all your time trying to get over your weaknesses, only to be forced to shoot yourself in the foot. Otherwise, you could become as dangerous as the last threat you had to take out. I'll divide them up and send them off after this. I just want to use them one last hunt, all right? Besides, we might need them. This thing did take out a pair of field agents, didn't it? Evelyn nodded. The statement was true enough, but the fact of the matter was that it was probably just a mistake by two newbies. Underestimating a dredge was generally a terrible idea, hence the rings. Although, admittedly, they might be a bit overkill. He would only ever reasonably need one of them to deal with most situations, so he would probably keep one of them nearby just in case. What to do with the rest, though? Evelyn could probably take care of one of them. The agency would probably want as many as they could get their hands on. That wasn't going to happen. Which of the 5 were even safe to take out of his sight? Probably none of them. He'd have to set up some pretty high security if he didn't want pseudo-vampires and nearly unkillable soldiers running around. Maybe that would be his next adventure. But for now, it was time to investigate this dredge. Well, should we get going? Reports say it likes to come out at night. I'd like to see if we can catch it in the woods before it gets to town. Iris nodded, pushing her seat back and standing up. She tugged on Jonathan's hand and pulled him out of his chair before Evelyn could hope to get out of hers. Then she walked briskly towards the woods, putting some distance between them. I'm sorry about the rings, John. Really, I am. I was just hoping to be a bit more subtle about it. I know you trust Eve, so, well, I thought you'd want to give her one for safekeeping. Jonathan leaned against her a bit more. She sincerely didn't want to hurt anyone. No wonder she became such a powerful astral. Possibly the most powerful. Arguments could be made for the idea that Jonathan himself was the most powerful wizard. Without these rings, would that be true anymore? He looked down at Iris, still concerned, still watching him think. You know, if you want to keep them for a while, I suppose that's all right. It's a little unfair of me to ask that of you. Then again, being outright powerful wasn't the way of mages, was it? That was the way monsters fought. Sure, if he kept them, he'd be able to protect his family against almost any threat. But for how long? Did he want to deal with thieves and glory seekers into his 50s, while raising Amber? It's all right. I just need to wean myself off of them. It's been so long since I had to be clever to win a fight. I promise, I'll get them out of the house. Evelyn caught up soon on her own, more than aware of the fact that they had wanted to have a private conversation. At least she'd let them have a little time to talk before joining up. From there, it didn't take long to get to the edge of the city and enter the woods. They were already close to the site of the last attack. With any luck, the monster would be dumb enough to come back to the same location. Otherwise, there would be a long night of tracking ahead of them. Dredges tended to have unique ways of killing their targets, so on many occasions it could be very difficult to track them. With his luck, it would turn out that this dredge swallowed its prey whole. They'd be lucky to find a few blood splatters. At least, that's what Jonathan thought before seeing the absolute carnage that lay only a few dozen meters into the woods. Trees were caked in dried blood. Shredded clothing was scattered among the lower branches of the trees. 2 devices dangled from a thin branch ahead, glowing with orange rune lines. Iris started to glow with a faint light, and Evelyn dug out a few plant seeds embedded with small crystals. Jonathan fit the red ring onto his finger as they moved into a triangle formation, Evelyn leading them towards the center of the carnage. Jonathan edged along, keeping the formation while scanning the woods for any sign of movement. He felt a shiver run down his spine. This creature knew what agents were. It knew enough to leave their bodies intact, and it knew it was being hunted. Evelyn, something is wrong here. We should turn around. Relax, John. We've got enough firepower here to deal with a simple dredge. Jonathan scowled, always so argumentative. She wasn't worried about this. That creature was out there. It was watching them, and they had no way of knowing where it would attack from. A quick check with pulsing magic in his eyes showed that there was some sort of magical force infecting the air in all directions. There was no way to see the monster's position from here. Even if they enhanced their eyes with runes, they wouldn't be able to make out the life force of the thing with all these trees around. If Evelyn weren't the only one with brawler-type spells, he would have grabbed Iris and left. Instead, he looked down at his rings. He brought the red, the gray, and the black. He wouldn't want to use the black ring yet. He could be far more effective without it, so long as Iris was around. The gray, he didn't like the feeling of that one, useful as it was. Still, these were the last 3 he had. He turned his attention back to the woods. The path they were following was obvious. Trees were marked with blood, and different belongings of the 2 agents were left hanging deliberately from different branches. Jonathan could hear his own heartbeat in his ears, rising in pace, slowly getting louder. Eve, we need to go, now. We're being led on. Can't you see that? Eve didn't acknowledge the comment as a laugh echoed from inside the woods. There were a series of sharp cracks, Evelyn's wrist flicked, and a column of vines shot up to grab a boulder out of the air as it crashed through the trees. At least she had been paying attention. There was another series of cracks, and a mass of gray stopped short, inches from Evelyn, with a dull thud. Jonathan got a good look at the thing. It was partially human-shaped, like most of the dredge. This one had unnaturally long arms and 3 equally malformed legs. Its face was nearly devoid of features, save for a wide grin full of needle-like teeth, and its head tapered into a thick, tendril-like appendage that hung off the back of its skull. Its skin was a dull gray color. It began to traipse around the barrier that Iris was holding up, studying it with an amused grin. It took a few testing punches at it, creating loud thuds that echoed into the quiet forest, matching the heartbeat that echoed in Jonathan's ears, which he could now distinguish as not being his own. Then it began to speak. All in vain, because death, in approaching him, had stalked with his black shadow before him and enveloped the victim. Jonathan. Jonathan stepped back away from the creature as it turned to face him, not only for the disturbing fact that it knew his name, but from its voice, which had the undertones of nails on a chalkboard. Evelyn suddenly threw a seed, the barrier disappearing in an instant to let it pass through. The barrier reformed as the seed arced down to the ground in front of the dredge. A cluster of bright red vines sprang up and wrapped around the gray monstrosity, partially lifting it into the air and restraining it. It thrashed against the restraints, but being stuck in the air was ineffective. Now for Jonathan's part. He walked carefully to the side as the creature seemed to watch him, grinning with those unnerving teeth as the rest of his body went deathly still. Jonathan made a hand signal to Iris to put a different wall up here. He couldn't cast through the astral barrier if it fully encased him. So, instead, she'd made a stationary wall only in front of him. He maneuvered his magic around the barrier and tied it to the beast that was watching him. Then, he ignited it. The flames clung to the creature's skin, even as it thrashed about trying to extinguish them. For just a moment, its smile seemed to fade slightly. The flames wouldn't go out as long as Jonathan kept feeding them, and those red vines were specifically bred and magically enhanced against fire. It was an amazing combination, yet Jonathan couldn't shake the feeling that something was still terribly wrong. The vines began to wither around the creature, turning black. Jonathan panicked for a heartbeat before recalling the leaves and decayed tree branches. No, he wasn't burning the vines. This creature had some effect on plants. He dismissed his flames and made another hand signal to Iris. We'll need another strategy, Eve. Your plants aren't going to hold up on this guy. That wasn't all. As the creature gradually lowered back down, the vines slowly rotting into sludge, Jonathan noticed that he'd only managed to put a few small patches of scalded flesh on the thing during that entire encounter. This thing was flame-resistant. Now, what were the chances of that? Eve let out a determined growl. Keep your advice to yourself, John. I can handle this thing all by myself if I need to. She whipped out a small, thorny seed embedded with a gem. No, she wasn't going to unleash one of those right away, was she? She had no idea how to conserve energy. She made a quick hand motion, then something hit her chest, and she slammed into the back of her reformed barrier. Jonathan whipped his head around to keep his eyes locked on the dredge as Iris screamed. It had been waiting for that brief flicker in the barrier where Eve would throw her next seed. The thorny seed dropped uselessly to the ground, blackened and rotten before it could take root and grow. Probably for the best. If something that dangerous grew while Evelyn couldn't control it, they'd be in an even bigger mess. Thankfully, Eve was still breathing. Great. Now he needed to defeat this thing on his own, and before Evelyn died. The creature was looking directly at him now, the sound of the beating heart growing stronger in his head. Good enough. If he was going to take a risk, he didn't want to put Iris on the line for it. "Iris, lock!" He leapt to the side at the exact same moment that Iris dropped the shield. A bolt of black energy ripped through his jacket. He flung an amount of magic under the creature's chin, then converted it instantly into an explosion of flames. The gray beast froze like a statue, its head forced up and away by the force of the explosion, as Iris locked it in place. Jonathan looked back at the ground behind him. There was an obvious patch of dead and rotting plants where the attack had landed. Glancing down at his leather jacket, there was a sizable hole with a ring of decaying mush around it. "That was a little close for comfort. You got him, Iris?" "Yeah, but hurry. I'm not sure how long I can hold him." "Right." Jonathan pulled out what for all intents and purposes looked like a can of soda. An average off-brand cola. He pumped a bit of magic into it, and it rearranged itself into a steel pipe with walls around 1/4 of an inch thick. Working quickly, he loaded it with a golf ball-sized hunk of lead and pressed his hand against the back end of the pipe. He pulled on all 5 of his linked gems, focusing for a moment and setting the magic to go off sequentially. There was no way he could react quickly enough to set the magic off manually. Still, he'd done this plenty of times before. Finally, he built up magic behind the lead and ignited. It sounded like one explosion as it went off, a massive detonation in a perfect line from the point of the barrel all the way to the creature's head, or rather to where its head used to be. The force of the impact had destroyed it completely. Jonathan grinned as he stumbled to the left, his sense of balance shot for a moment from having to funnel that much energy at once. 1.5 months of charging used up in an instant, but at least it was grand, a fitting enough end to his career. He looked back up at Iris. She had an intense look of focus on her face, but soon it lightened up. She'd be waiting for the creature's death spasms to end before she let go of her astral lock. Even as the thought crossed his mind, the odd heartbeat sound began to die, and eventually stop inside his head. He could have sworn he'd heard of that type of mental pressure somewhere before. Then again, what monster ability had never been copied before? Jonathan retrieved his phone out of his pocket and hit the speed dial for the agency's cleanup line. Nobody would pick up. They'd just send out a retrieval squad and medical support. A few seconds after the mental pressure was relieved from the air, Iris finally let out a sigh and relaxed her abilities. The headless monstrosity shot forward and stabbed a bony hand through Iris's stomach, then froze in place again. Iris slumped forward on the freakishly long appendage, gripping it in both hands and beginning to hyperventilate. She turned and looked at Jonathan with desperation in her eyes as the heartbeat sound returned, pulsing against his thoughts. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. "Jonathan!" That snapped him out of his shock, and he ran to her. She was already bleeding heavily from the wound. Blood was flowing down her legs, mixing with a pool of the creature's own black blood. He fumbled with the gray ring, activating it as he slipped it onto her finger. Her bleeding stopped instantly, but her legs and clothing were still drenched. He helped to move her off of the limb. It wouldn't cause her pain, and she wouldn't bleed. At this point, it was far more important to get her away from that dangerous thing. "Jonathan, you need to use the other ring. I can't hold him for very long." Her voice was unnervingly calm. He always hated that aspect of the gray ring, but she was right. He pulsed magic into the black ring, letting a portion of his magic get sealed off as it worked to enhance his physiology. The creature bolted forward again, but Jonathan could see it now. He reacted instantly, raising a hand and forcing out another month's worth of energy, then igniting it rapidly into a large-scale explosion. This one was far less directed, and it flung the dredge back into the trees, making one of them crack dangerously. The creature didn't hesitate to get back on its feet, erratically moving side to side as it lurched forward again. This was what Jonathan had been waiting for. The creature was now covered in small cuts from both the blast and the trees behind. He severed off an amount of magic and guided it to the leg wound, attaching it there. Then, combustion. He ignited it all at once, using an amount of magic to keep the sudden explosion sealed against the open wound. The creature's left leg exploded in a clean line, causing it to stumble and trip before it could close the distance. That might be enough to end this. His gems were beginning to run low. He hadn't charged them enough before this mission. Eve was supposed to make up for that. Eve! The creature was getting dangerously close to her, even limping forward as it was now. Jonathan froze for a second before starting forward, soon breaking into a run as the creature started limping forward at an unnaturally quick pace. How could it see him so well without a head? He formed another explosion against the creature's arm, using up even more of his precious reserves of magic. The cut wasn't deep enough, and while the flesh was ripped apart, it didn't do nearly enough to disable that limb. Jonathan's heart began to follow along with the beat in his head. The sound turned erratic and frantic, causing pain in his chest as he struggled to think. Jonathan managed to close the distance to Eve, but the dredge was right on top of them now. He wouldn't be able to outrun it while carrying Eve, and he couldn't create an explosion this close. He couldn't. There was nothing. He grit his teeth, calling on the last of his reserves as he created an intense flow of magic, shaping it vaguely after the beast in front of him. He let it build more slowly this time, roiling into an intense and forceful flame that rushed forward like storm winds. It was draining, it was wasteful, but it was instinct. He reached down with one hand to grab Eve's dress and started dragging her back. A hand lashed out and caught Jonathan in the side, sending him sprawling backwards. His arm nearly got pulled out of its socket while holding on to Eve. If it hadn't been for the extra strength of the black ring, he probably would have dislocated it. Hell, he probably would have gone into shock from the chunk that was now hanging loosely from the side of his stomach. He was bleeding fiercely now as he stumbled back towards Iris. He dropped Eve next to her and nearly collapsed from exhaustion. The creature had managed to pull itself through his flaming jet stream and was now crawling diligently forward to finish the job. His gems were empty now. That had used up the last of his reserves, and the beast in front of him knew it. The heartbeat in his head began to slow, forcing his heart to do the same. Weakness overcame his body, and his vision began to fuzz. He was so slow. Even enhanced by the black ring, his body refused to move at more than a crawl. A cold hand grabbed him by the wrist, pulling him down. He used the meager strength he had left to turn and see Iris, barely sitting up, crying and bleeding. He relaxed slightly, a gentle smile creeping into the corners of his mouth as she smiled back at him. He'd found someone to love and spent his life with her. His mind was so muddled by the pressure, the slowing heart, that he hadn't noticed the change in her demeanor. By the time he did, it was far too late as she slipped the gray ring onto his finger and activated it for him. Suddenly, every beautiful memory that had been flooding into his mind disappeared. The love and compassion he'd been feeling were forced down by the power of the ring until they were nothing but coals. He knew that he loved her, but he couldn't feel it any longer. Even the feeling of guilt that surged up as a side effect was suppressed by the ring. But the heartbeat disappeared, his body reinvigorated as the mental pressure lost control of his heart rate and adrenaline flooded his veins. "Jonathan, you need to get home to Amber." She was crying, sobbing, and barely able to get the words out as the color slowly drained from her face. She wouldn't survive without that ring, but maybe he could. His mind worked quickly without emotions to muddle it. The dredge was close again, but heavily damaged. It resisted fire, but if he tapped into his blood magic, he might be able to damage it enough to get away. He pulled on the blood in his body, converting it into magic, instantly feeling weaker as he formed it around another of the creature's legs, along the front left one that he could still see. He kept it at the joint, forcing it into a spiked shape. Then he ignited. The explosion wasn't massive, but at this slower speed, it was far easier to direct it. He forced flames into the joint, forcing it apart and sending that piece of the limb flying. The creature roared indignantly from its throat, then paused there.
But for many minutes, the heart beat on with a muffled sound. This, however, did not vex me.
The dredge's voice seemed to emanate from the woods around them, completely disembodied. It couldn't have been a mental attack. The gray ring nullified that. Despite that, the voice seemed to speak directly into Jonathan's head.
Was it possible they heard not? No. They heard. They knew.
Jonathan's anger flared against the ring, but was suppressed regardless. This creature was trying to distract him, wasn't it? It had stopped trying to crawl forward at this point.
You know me not, and yet I know you very well, hired thief and arsonist. Yes, a thief, I call you so. Look only on your finger for the proof. A part of me you stole.
The Wanderer? This creature in front of him was the Wanderer? That should have been impossible. He'd killed that thing thoroughly. He'd burned its brain. A cold reality began to set in. The Wanderer had been able to regenerate. Apparently, that ability was a lot stronger than he'd known, and this creature had been planning to kill them since that day. But Jonathan wasn't going to give it a chance to recover this time. The Wanderer had made a fatal mistake in its positioning. He flexed his wrist, flinging magic towards a nearby tree, igniting it from inside, tearing out an angled chunk of the stuff and sending it crashing down on top of the beast again. With the creature too slow to evade, he started felling trees around it, igniting their leaves, burying it in a giant campfire as the trunks themselves slowly but surely began to catch flame. He used up far too much blood in the process and collapsed amidst the forest fire. But the creature was pinned. It would burn into nothingness eventually.
You have escaped death in one form, only to be delivered into worse than death in some other. You cannot escape me forever, Jonathan.
His body gave out, and he let himself lay staring at his wife. With the last bit of his effort, he slipped the gray ring off his finger and let himself feel his love for her as he faded into unconsciousness.